The office door wasn't locked. I pushed it open without knocking, balancing the lunch I'd brought for my husband in one hand. The scene inside made me freeze. Marcus stood inches from a young intern named Tessa, his hand resting on the small of her back. Their laughter died the moment they saw me. The intimacy in that silence said everything. Marcus didn't look guilty or surprised. He looked annoyed. "Kate," he said flatly, stepping back just enough to maintain appearances. "You shouldn't be here." Not sorry. Not embarrassed. Just irritated that I'd interrupted. Tessa grabbed a folder from his desk, her cheeks flushed, and hurried past me without making eye contact. I stood there holding his favorite sandwich, feeling like an intruder in a space I'd helped him build. "I brought lunch," I managed to say. He glanced at the bag, then back at his computer screen. "I'm busy. You should call first." I turned to leave, my face burning with humiliation. That's when I heard him lean toward Tessa in the hallway and whisper something. His voice carried just enough for me to catch it. "She'll be gone soon. She doesn't matter." The words hit me like cold water. I kept walking, my legs somehow carrying me past cubicles and concerned faces. I made it to my car before the shaking started. But it wasn't tears that came. It was something else entirely. Something sharp and clear and furious. For 12 years, I'd been the supportive wife. I'd worked late nights building his client database, organizing his chaotic filing systems, and managing his schedule when he was too overwhelmed. I'd given up my own business dreams to be his foundation. And now I was nothing. Someone who didn't matter. I drove home in silence, my mind oddly calm. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or yell or demand explanations. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a folder. I named it, Just in Case. Then I started gathering everything I could remember about his business operations, client lists, and financial systems. If I didn't matter, then I had nothing left to lose. My name is Kate Morrison, and I'd spent 12 years being quiet. I met Marcus when I was 26, full of ideas for starting my own consulting firm. He was charismatic and ambitious, launching a marketing agency with big dreams and little structure. I fell in love with his confidence. He fell in love with my organizational skills, though I didn't realize that's all it was at the time. "Help me get this off the ground," he'd said over dinner one night. "Once we're stable, you can start your thing. We'll build empires together." I believed him. I built his client management system from scratch. I created workflows that turned his chaos into profit. When he landed his first major contract, I was the one who structured the proposal. His name was on it, but my strategy won it. Years passed. His empire grew. Mine never started. "After this quarter," he'd say. "After we hit this revenue goal." The goalposts kept moving until I stopped asking. I became his unpaid COO, his event planner, his crisis manager. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible. The first lie came 3 years into our marriage. Marcus returned from a supposed business trip to Chicago smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. Floral and expensive, clinging to his collar. "Long flight," he'd said, kissing my forehead. The woman next to me must have bathed in perfume. I found the restaurant receipt in his jacket pocket later. Dinner for 2 at a steakhouse. Expensive wine. Dessert. He'd told me he grabbed a quick meal at the airport. When I asked about it, he barely looked up from his phone. Client dinner. Last minute thing. You know how it is. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I filed that doubt away in the back of my mind and convinced myself I was being paranoid. Looking back, that was the moment I should have started keeping score. Instead, I taught myself not to ask questions. I became an expert at ignoring red flags, at explaining away inconsistencies, at making excuses for a man who'd already stopped making them for himself. That night, after hearing those words in his office, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Marcus, listening to him snore, and opened my laptop. The folder I'd created sat empty, waiting. I started with the obvious things. I forwarded myself copies of client contracts I'd helped negotiate. I screenshotted the workflow systems I'd built. I documented the vendor relationships I'd maintained for years. Then I went deeper. I accessed our joint accounts and discovered a credit card I didn't recognize. Hotel charges in our own city. Expensive dinners when he told me he was working late. A jewelry purchase from 2 months ago. I hadn't received any jewelry. I photographed everything. Bank statements, suspicious transactions, business expenses that didn't add up. I organized it all meticulously, the way I'd once organized his entire business. This wasn't revenge yet. This was preparation. This was insurance. This was me finally learning that trust without verification was just another word for foolishness. By sunrise, I had a file that would have made any lawyer proud. 2 weeks later, Marcus hosted a dinner party for his brothers and their wives. I spent the afternoon cooking, setting the table, playing the perfect hostess. During dessert, the conversation turned to business. Marcus's younger brother asked about my candle-making hobby. I'd been experimenting with small-batch luxury candles, selling a few online. It was the only creative outlet I had left. Marcus laughed loudly, that public laugh he used when performing for an audience. Kate's little candle project? It's cute, but let's be real. Everyone chuckled. His older brother joined in. What's next, essential oils? More laughter. I smiled and served coffee, my hands perfectly steady. Inside, something cracked. She enjoys her crafts, Marcus continued, patting my hand like I was a child. It keeps her busy. Busy. Like I was a housewife filling empty hours, not someone who'd built the foundation of his success. I excused myself to the kitchen and gripped the counter until my knuckles turned white. That night, after everyone left, I updated my file with a new section, documentation of every business idea he'd dismissed, every contribution he'd erased, every time he'd made me feel small. A week after the dinner party, Marcus said something I couldn't forget. We were in his home office, and I'd suggested a new client retention strategy. He barely glanced up from his computer. Kate, you wouldn't last a month in my world. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost kind, like he was stating an obvious truth. It's different than what you're used to. My industry is ruthless. You need thick skin. He swiveled his chair toward me, warming to his subject. Men survive in this environment because we don't take things personally. We make hard calls. You're too soft, too emotional. I felt my face flush. I built half your systems. You organized some files, he corrected. That's not the same as running a business. That's support work. He turned back to his screen, the conversation over. Especially not wives, he muttered, probably thinking I couldn't hear. I left his office without another word. But I heard everything he didn't say. I heard that he'd never seen me as a partner. I heard that my contributions were worthless. I heard that he'd already written me off as someone who couldn't threaten him. That was his first mistake. I spent the next 3 days researching business formation procedures. I learned about LLCs, operating agreements, and trademark registration. I discovered that everything I'd built for Marcus, all those systems and strategies, weren't legally his intellectual property because I'd never been an employee. I'd been a volunteer. Which meant I could use every single method I'd developed. I could build a better version of his company using my own playbook. I registered a new LLC under my maiden name, Bennett. I chose a name that wouldn't trigger any recognition, Catalyst Strategic Solutions. Different enough from his agency, Marcus Hale Marketing, that no one would connect them. At least not immediately. I opened business accounts at a different bank. I created a separate email address and phone number. I built a website using a template he'd never seen. Everything was clean, separate, untraceable. If anyone searched for Kate Hale, they'd find nothing. Kate Bennett, however, was about to become very busy. I worked on it late at night after Marcus fell asleep, or during the day when he was at his office with Tessa. Building my escape plan felt like breathing for the first time in years. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. 5 years ago, Marcus had worked briefly with a woman named Valerie Chen at a startup incubator. He'd called her aggressive, difficult, too demanding. Translation, she'd called him out on his laziness and refused to do his work for him. They'd parted ways badly. I found Valerie's information through LinkedIn. She now ran a boutique consulting firm specializing in competitive strategy. Her client list was impressive. I sent her a carefully worded email explaining that I was starting a consulting business and had heard excellent things about her work. Could we meet for coffee? She agreed immediately. When we met, I was honest. I told her who I was married to, what I'd built for him, and what I planned to do. Her smile was ice-cold and beautiful. Marcus Hale, she said slowly. That arrogant piece of work told our mutual investors I was too emotional to handle client relationships. She leaned forward. I'd love to mentor you. Let's destroy him professionally. We shook hands. I finally had an ally who understood exactly what I was up against. Our anniversary fell on a Tuesday. Marcus forgot entirely. I woke up that morning already knowing he wouldn't remember, and I was right. He left early for a breakfast meeting without so much as a good morning. I spent the day launching Catalyst's website. Valerie had connected me with a designer who created something sleek and professional. The copy highlighted strategic marketing solutions, client retention systems, and operational efficiency. Everything I'd perfected while working for Marcus. At 3 p.m, I received a credit card alert. Marcus had charged a hotel room downtown. The Grand Riverside, our anniversary hotel from years ago. But he wasn't there with me. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. Instead, I optimized my website's SEO, targeting the exact keywords his company ranked for. I set up social media accounts and posted my first content. By evening, Catalyst Strategic Solutions was live and searchable. While Marcus was with Tessa, I was building his replacement. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone stopped ringing around that time. Marcus used to call me during the day, asking about dinner plans or if I'd picked up his dry cleaning. Those calls stopped. He worked later, came home after I was asleep, left before I woke up. We became strangers sharing a house. One evening, I walked past our wedding photo in the hallway. Young faces, hopeful smiles, promises we'd both believed. I used to stop and remember that day fondly. Now I just saw a younger version of myself who had no idea what was coming. I kept walking to the home office and opened my second bank account statement. The business account for Catalyst was growing. I'd started taking on small consulting projects, careful not to compete directly with Marcus yet. A few startups, a nonprofit, a small retail chain. Each one paid into my separate account. Money he'd never see, never control, never dismiss as cute hobby income. Financial independence felt powerful. Every deposit was proof that I could survive without him. More than survive. I could thrive. I just needed the right moment to show him exactly how much I didn't need him anymore. 3 weeks into building Catalyst, I received an unexpected resume. A young woman named Ashley Carter applied for an administrative position I'd posted. Her address caught my eye. The same apartment complex where Tessa lived. I'd found that out weeks ago through some casual online searching. During Ashley's interview at a coffee shop, I asked casual questions about her living situation. She mentioned her roommate worked at a marketing agency. She's always working late, Ashley said, rolling her eyes. Or says she is. Honestly, I think she's seeing someone there. Her boss, probably. She talks in her sleep sometimes. I maintained my professional expression. That must be awkward. You have no idea, Ashley continued. Last week she was mumbling about some big presentation he's giving next month. Something about a tech startup pitch. She's been helping him prepare. I filed that information away carefully. I didn't hire Ashley, but I sent her a generous consolation payment for her time. The intelligence she'd unknowingly provided was worth far more than an entry-level salary. Armed with Ashley's information, I did more digging. Marcus was pitching to a tech startup called NextPoint Digital. They were looking for a marketing agency to handle their product launch. Big budget, high visibility, exactly the kind of client that could make or break a firm's reputation. I knew Marcus's pitch style. I'd helped him develop it years ago. Flashy slides, big promises, lots of charm, minimal substance. He relied on personality over strategy. I spent 2 days crafting a counterpitch. I focused on measurable outcomes, detailed timelines, and case studies from my recent projects. I emphasized sustainable growth over quick wins. Then I reached out to NextPoint CEO through a mutual contact Valerie provided. I requested a meeting to present an alternative marketing approach. They agreed to hear me out. The morning of my pitch, I dressed carefully. Professional, confident, understated. I walked into their office knowing exactly what Marcus would offer them, and I planned to offer something better. My presentation was clean and data-driven. No flash, just solid strategy. The CEO and his team asked tough questions. I answered every single one. At the end, their CFO leaned back and smiled. This is exactly what we needed. When can you start? Marcus's company started bleeding clients shortly after I landed NextPoint. At first, it was small. A mid-size retail client chose not to renew their contract. Then a restaurant group switched to a competitor. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed sabotage. Just the normal ebb and flow of business. Except it wasn't normal. Each client I approached received a carefully crafted pitch highlighting the gaps in their current marketing strategy. I never mentioned Marcus by name. I simply demonstrated what I could do better. Valerie taught me how to identify which clients were unhappy, which contracts were coming up for renewal, and exactly when to strike. Within 3 weeks, Marcus lost 4 clients. His revenue dropped noticeably. I watched from a distance as his confidence started to crack. He came home frustrated, complaining about disloyal clients and unfair competition. Someone's poaching, he told his brother during a phone call I overheard. I don't know who, but they're using strategies that look familiar. I hid my smile and continued building Catalyst's portfolio. Each client I won was one less income stream for him. Slow pressure, steady damage. Death by 1,000 cuts. Marcus threw a tantrum at his office. I heard about it from Ashley, who'd stayed in touch and apparently got her gossip from Tessa. He'd fired 2 staff members for underperformance, claiming they'd leaked client information to competitors. They hadn't, of course. The problem wasn't leaks. The problem was that his business model was outdated and his client service was mediocre. Without me holding it together behind the scenes, his operation was showing its cracks. He suspected sabotage, which wasn't wrong. But he was looking outward at competitors, not inward at the wife he'd dismissed. That was his second mistake. He never considered that the quiet woman who'd served coffee at his dinner parties might be capable of strategic warfare. He'd underestimated me for so long that he couldn't see me as a threat now. Meanwhile, Catalyst kept growing. I hired 2 employees, both experienced marketers who'd left Marcus's firm disappointed by his leadership. They brought insider knowledge and client relationships I could never have built alone. Everything was falling into place. A letter arrived at our house one afternoon. Marcus Hale Marketing's law firm, questioning whether I had any involvement in recent client losses. The letter was carefully worded, not quite accusatory, but clearly suspicious. They wanted to know if I'd started any business ventures, contacted any of his clients, or shared confidential information. I read it twice, my heart pounding. Then I called Valerie. She read it over the phone and laughed. They have nothing, she said confidently. Your company is under your maiden name. Different bank, different address, different everything. They can't prove a connection. She was right. I'd been meticulous. I responded through my own attorney, denying any wrongdoing and expressing surprise at the accusation. I even included a touch of hurt feelings. How could my husband think I'd sabotage his work? The letter I sent back was perfect. Innocent, slightly wounded, completely clean. Marcus read my response that evening, and I watched his face carefully. He seemed frustrated but convinced. Sorry, he muttered. The lawyers are paranoid. I nodded graciously. Inside, I was celebrating. If he suspected me and still couldn't find proof, I'd already won. Marcus's confidence returned briefly after my lawyer's letter cleared me. He started telling people that his business would recover, that he'd simply hit a rough patch. Let her try, I heard him say during a video call he thought was muted. He'd been talking to a friend about Catalyst, which he'd finally discovered online. It's cute, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Some startup consulting thing. She'll be out of business in a month. Kate doesn't have what it takes. His friend laughed in agreement. I stood in the doorway, listening to every word. He still hadn't connected Catalyst to me, even though my strategies were identical to what I'd built for him. He was so convinced of my incompetence that he couldn't see reality. That night, I updated my timeline. I'd been building Catalyst for exactly 27 days. In 4 more days, I'd hit 1 month. His words echoed in my mind. She'll be out in a month. I smiled as I calculated my next move. He'd be right about the timing. Just wrong about who'd be out. I'd been tracking Marcus's financial troubles through public records and insider information. His business was hemorrhaging cash faster than he could replace it. Several clients had left, new business wasn't coming in, and his operating costs hadn't decreased. He was drowning, but slowly. I needed to accelerate his collapse. Through Valerie's network, I identified Marcus's largest investor, a venture capital firm that had backed his expansion 2 years ago. They'd put in substantial money expecting growth. Instead, they were watching decline. I drafted an anonymous email to the firm's managing partner. I attached documentation showing financial irregularities, unpaid vendor invoices, and declining client retention rates. Everything was publicly available information, carefully compiled. I wasn't lying or fabricating. I was simply organizing the truth into a damning narrative. I sent it from an untraceable email address, marked as a concerned industry insider. 48 hours later, Marcus received a call from his investor. I was in the next room when he answered. His face went pale as he listened. The investor was pulling out. Effective immediately. Marcus tried to argue, to negotiate, to beg. None of it worked. When he hung up, he sat in silence for 10 minutes. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Marcus's company collapsed faster than even I'd anticipated. Without the investor's capital, he couldn't make payroll. Employees quit before they could be fired. Suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding invoices. His landlord threatened eviction over unpaid rent. Within 2 weeks, Marcus Hale Marketing was effectively finished. I watched him spiral from a distance, maintaining my concerned wife facade while privately monitoring every development. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, started drinking more than usual. Tessa disappeared from his life the moment the money troubles started. Apparently, she'd been more interested in the successful CEO than the struggling has-been. He met with a bankruptcy attorney on a Thursday afternoon. I knew because I'd been tracking his calendar, which he'd never bothered to password protect. That same day, Catalyst landed its biggest client yet, a national retail chain worth 6 figures annually. The contrast wasn't lost on me. As Marcus filed for bankruptcy protection, I was signing contracts that would double my revenue. His world was ending. Mine was just beginning. And I still had one more move to make. I waited for the perfect moment. Marcus filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, hoping to restructure and save something from the wreckage. His company's assets went up for evaluation, available for purchase by creditors or interested parties. That's when I made my move. Through a shell company Valerie had helped me establish, I made an offer for the majority shares of Marcus Hale Marketing. The offer was legitimate, properly structured, completely legal. The bankruptcy trustee reviewed it and approved it quickly. It was the best offer they'd received. Marcus never saw it coming. The purchase was handled through lawyers and intermediaries. His name appeared nowhere on my paperwork. My maiden name was buried in corporate documents he'd never think to search. By the time he understood what was happening, the deal was closed. I owned 60% of his company. I controlled the board. I had the power to restructure, rebrand, or dissolve it entirely. And Marcus had a mandatory meeting with the new ownership scheduled for Monday morning. I spent the weekend preparing, choosing my outfit carefully, rehearsing my words. This was the moment I'd been building toward for exactly 31 days. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Marcus drove to the office building where his company still maintained a small rented space. He thought he was meeting with new investors who might save his business. Instead, he walked into a conference room and found me sitting at the head of the table. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, understanding. "Kate," he said, his voice uncertain. I smiled calmly and slid a document across the polished table. "Hello, Marcus. We need to discuss your employment status." He picked up the paper with shaking hands. It was a termination letter, effective immediately. "I don't understand," he stammered, looking from me to the document and back again. "You said I'd never last a month in your world," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "It's been 31 days. I didn't just last. I won." His face flushed red. "You can't do this. This is my company." "Not anymore," I corrected. "I purchased controlling interest through the bankruptcy proceedings. Everything was legal and properly filed. Your attorneys reviewed and approved the sale." He tried to argue, to negotiate, to find some angle. But there was nothing left to say. Marcus attempted every tactic he could think of. He appealed to our marriage, our history, the years we'd spent together. "We can fix this," he pleaded. "Kate, please. We're partners." I shook my head slowly. "We were never partners, Marcus. I was your assistant. Your support system. Your invisible workforce. But never your partner." His desperation turned to anger. "You planned this. You've been sabotaging me for weeks." "I've been building my own success," I corrected. "If that damaged your business, perhaps your foundation wasn't as strong as you thought." He stood up abruptly, trying to regain some authority. It didn't work. Security was already waiting outside the conference room, per my instructions. "You need to leave," I said calmly. "Your personal items have been boxed. Your access cards are deactivated. Your company email will be closed by end of business today." The reality finally sank in. His face went pale. "This is because of Tessa, isn't it?" "Kate, that was nothing. It didn't mean anything." I looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't about Tessa. This is about you never seeing my value until it was gone." Security escorted Marcus out of the building. I watched from the conference room window as he walked to his car, carrying a small box of personal belongings. His shoulders were slumped, his movements defeated. The man who'd ruled this office with arrogant confidence was now just another fired employee. Tessa was long gone, of course. She'd moved on to another executive at another company the moment Marcus's troubles started. His office had already been cleared out, transformed into a workspace for one of my new hires. The building that had once represented his empire was now the satellite location for Catalyst Strategic Solutions. Every person he'd underestimated, every employee he'd mistreated, every client he'd taken for granted had either left him or joined me. The morning after Marcus's termination, I held an all-staff meeting. The energy in the room was electric. These people had watched the old regime crumble and a new one rise from its ashes. "We're building something better here," I told them. "Something ethical, sustainable, and profitable. Something that values every person's contribution." The applause was genuine. I'd given them what Marcus never could, respect. The company I'd built using Marcus's playbook was everything his had pretended to be. I kept his best practices and eliminated his worst habits. Client communication improved dramatically. Employee satisfaction scores soared. Revenue stabilized and then grew. Within 3 months, we'd recovered all the clients Marcus lost and gained several more. I rebranded the merged companies under the Catalyst name, erasing Marcus Hale Marketing from the industry entirely. His name disappeared from websites, marketing materials, and industry listings. It was like he'd never existed professionally. I ran into Valerie for coffee 6 months after the takeover. She raised her cup in a toast. "You're a chess master, Kate. I've never seen anyone execute a plan that perfectly." I smiled. I learned from the best. And from the worst. Marcus tried reaching out a few times in those early months. Emails asking if we could talk, texts suggesting counseling, voicemails that swung between apologetic and angry. I didn't respond to any of them. My lawyer handled all necessary communication regarding our divorce. There was nothing left to say. I don't hate Marcus. That would require caring about him more than I care about myself, and I've stopped doing that. I'm not bitter or angry or consumed by revenge. I'm simply better. I'm thriving in ways I never could have imagined when I was organizing his files and managing his calendar. My company now employs 23 people. We handle marketing for some of the most innovative companies in the region. Industry publications have featured our work. I've been invited to speak at conferences about strategic business growth. The quiet wife who served coffee at dinner parties is now the CEO everyone wants to meet. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at a Women in Business conference. The topic was overcoming obstacles and building success on your own terms. I accepted immediately. That evening, I sat in my home office, the one that used to be Marcus's. I'd redecorated it completely, erasing every trace of him. On my desk was a candle from my original, cute hobby line. I'd never stopped making them. The label read, "Soft doesn't mean weak." I lit it and watched the flame steady itself. That was me now, soft where it mattered, strong where it counted, and finally free.